Hello, my name is Deck. I'm trying to get used to talking on camera and share resources that I have found along my healing journey. Um, I'm still really getting used to that and trying to, I guess, take the very small risks of like recording myself reading something from a book, for example, which I'm going to do today. This is a book. Oh, it says 555 on my clock. This is a book that has helped me figure out a lot about the art of transmutation. Alchemy of pain and suffering into something that is more, I don't know, not easier to experience, I will say that. Finding something to grow from within pain and difficult experiences. But this book has been a very valuable resource, and I just want to read the intro because I think it's brilliant, and I just need to practice talking on a camera and sharing it somewhere. So here we go. The Art of Transforming Suffering from No Mud No Lotus by Thich Nhat Hanh. We all want to be happy, and there are many books and teachers in the world that try to help people be happier, yet we all continue to suffer. Therefore, we may think that we're doing it wrong. Somehow we are failing at happiness. That isn't true. Being able to enjoy happiness doesn't require that we have zero suffering. In fact, the art of happiness is also the art of suffering well. When we learn to acknowledge, embrace, and understand our suffering, we suffer much less. Not only that, but we're also able to go further and transform our suffering into understanding, compassion, and joy for ourselves and for others. One of the most difficult things for us to accept is that there is no realm where there's only happiness and there's no suffering. This doesn't mean that we should despair. Suffering can be transformed. As soon as we open our mouth to say suffering, we know that the opposite of suffering is already there as well. Where there is suffering, there is happiness. According to the creation story in the biblical book of Genesis, God said, "Let there be light." I like to imagine that light replied, saying, "God, I have to wait for my twin brother, darkness, to be with me. I can't be there without the darkness." God asked, "Why do you need to wait? Darkness is there." Light answered, "In that case, then I am also already there." If we focus exclusively on pursuing happiness, we may regard suffering as something to be ignored or resisted. We think of it as something that gets in the way of happiness. But the art of happiness is also at the same time the art of knowing how to suffer well. If we know how to use our suffering, we can transform it and suffer much less. Knowing how to suffer well is essential to realizing true happiness. That is powerful. That is very powerful. It's been a minute since I've read this, but it has gotten me through some dark times, I will say. Highly recommend this resource to anybody. I would love to read more, honestly. Should I? Yeah. I'll read the next couple sections, because at least until the title section. Suffering and happiness are not separate. When we suffer, we tend to think that suffering is all there is at that moment, and happiness belongs to some other time or place. People often ask, "Why do I have to suffer?" Thinking we should be able to have a life without any suffering is as deluded as thinking we should be able to have a left side without a right side. The same is true of thinking we have a life in which no happiness whatsoever is to be found. If the left says, "Right, you have to go away. I don't want you. I only want the left," that's nonsense. Because then the left would have to stop existing as well. If there's no right, then there's no left. Where there is no suffering, there can be no happiness either, and vice versa. If we can learn to see and skillfully engage with both the presence of happiness and the presence of suffering, we will go in the direction of enjoying life more. Every day we go a little further in that direction, and eventually we realize that suffering and happiness are not two separate things. Cold air can be painful if you aren't wearing enough warm clothes. But when you're feeling overheated or you're walking outside with proper clothing, the bracing sensation of cold air can be a source of feeling joy and aliveness. Absolutely true. Suffering isn't some kind of external, objective source of oppression and pain. There might be things that cause you to suffer, such as loud music or bright lights, which may bring other people joy. There are things that bring you joy that annoy other people. The rainy day that ruins your plans for a picnic is a boon for the farmer whose field is parched. Happiness is possible right now, today. True. But happiness cannot be without suffering. So true. Some people think that in order to be happy, they must avoid all suffering. And so they are constantly vigilant, constantly worrying. They end up sacrificing all their spontaneity, freedom, and joy. This is not correct. If you can recognize and accept your pain without running away from it, you will discover that although pain is there, joy can also be there at the same time. Some say that suffering is only an illusion, or that to live wisely, we have to transcend both suffering and joy. I say the opposite. The way to suffer well and be happy is to stay in touch with what is actually going on. In doing so, you will gain liberating insights into the true nature of suffering and joy. Yes, okay. I will read the No Mud No Lotus title section, and then I will put this down because this is a brilliant book and deserves the time of sitting with it and reading it for sure. And I am enjoying reading this out loud to myself right now, and hopefully you get something from this. I'm gonna put it in the comment or the description or whatever. Highly, highly recommend this book. Okay. No Mud No Lotus. Both suffering and happiness are of an organic nature, which means they are both transitory. They are always changing. The flower, when it wilts, becomes the compost. The compost can help grow a flower again. Happiness is also organic and impermanent by nature. It can become suffering, and suffering can become happiness again. If you look deeply into a flower, you see that a flower is made only of non-flower elements. In that flower, there is a cloud. Of course we know a cloud isn't a flower, but without a cloud, a flower can't be. If there's no cloud, there's no rain, and no flower can grow. You don't have to be a dreamer to see a cloud floating in a flower. It's really there. Sunlight is also there. Sunlight isn't flower, but without sunlight, no flower is possible. If we continue to look deeply into the flower, we see many other things, like the earth and the minerals. Without them, a flower cannot be. So it's a fact that a flower is made only of non-flower elements. A flower can't be by herself alone. A flower can only interbe with everything else. I love that. You can't remove the sunlight, the soil, or the cloud from the flower. In each of our Plum Village practice centers around the world, we have a lotus pond. Everyone knows we need to have mud for lotuses to grow. The mud doesn't smell so good, but the lotus flower smells very good. If you don't have mud, the lotus won't manifest. You can't grow lotus flowers on marble. Without mud, there can be no lotus. It is possible, of course, to get stuck in the mud of life. It's easy enough to notice mud all over you at times. The hardest thing to practice is not allowing yourself to be overwhelmed by despair. When you're overwhelmed by despair, all you can see is suffering everywhere you look. Very true. You feel as if the worst thing is happening to you. But we must remember that suffering is a kind of mud that we need in order to generate joy and happiness. Without suffering, there's no happiness. So we shouldn't discriminate against the mud. We have to learn how to embrace and cradle our own suffering and the suffering of the world with a lot of tenderness. When I lived in Vietnam during the war, it was difficult to see our way through that dark and heavy mud. It seemed like the destruction would just go on and on forever. Every day people would ask me if I thought the war would end soon. It was very difficult to answer because there was no end in sight. But I knew if I said, I don't know, that would only water their seeds of despair. So when people asked me that question, I replied, everything is impermanent, even war. It will end someday. Knowing that, we could continue to work for peace. And indeed, the war did end. Now the former mortal enemies are busily trading and touring back and forth, and people throughout the world enjoy practicing our tradition's teachings on mindfulness and peace. If you know how to make good use of the mud, you can grow beautiful lotuses. If you know how to make good use of suffering, you can produce happiness. We do need some suffering to make happiness possible, and most of us have enough suffering inside us and around us to be able to do that. We don't have to create more. Oh, what a beautiful book. I love this. Thank you so much. Sorry, just gotta put that back on the bookshelf. Yeah, my healing journey has been very interesting because I've had to do a lot of reading books like that while I was dealing with chaos. And I'm so grateful that there are resources like that, and I'm really hoping that I can become one of those resources to make it easier for other people who are dealing with chaos and who, like me, are probably getting a lot of their healing materials from YouTube, Instagram, books, things like that, because it's expensive. It's really expensive, and when you're broke and on a budget and have to do everything with no resources except what's available on the internet for free and etc., you gotta do what you gotta do, and I want to make that easier. So I want to share the resources that I have found that have allowed me to get through situations without much. So hopefully this reaches some people that need to see it. I know it's going to eventually. I send my love to you if you are still watching. I send so much love. I send so much peace. I send so much gratitude. I hope you have a really nice time that you are seeing this. I don't know how to... time is not real, you know? But I send my love. Bye.